Hello friends, welcome in. If you are new here, my name is Andrea. I do a bunch of random things on this channel. I stream The Sims, I stream Spyro. Today we are making dice because I am a dice maker. I make and sell dice and other things for tabletop games over in my Etsy shop and on Instagram at Sunflower Dice. And today we're going to take you behind the scenes a little bit to show you what is it like making dice, what is that process like, what goes into just the first step of pouring those beautiful, beautiful handmade dice. Let me get our camera set up a little bit better here. Our stream setup is a little unconventional. There's not going to be a face in the stream. You'll see my hands a lot though. So there is that. I'm really excited to get into today's stream. It's been a little while since I've done a pouring stream, so I'm really excited to walk through what that process is like. And we're going to be doing a few different things today. So the first thing I always do is just prep anything I'm going to need for each of the pours I plan on doing in a given day. And today that means we are prepping for 4 pours. So I usually make a list. I have changed my mind a few times today, but today we're going to make some galaxy dice. We're going to remake the Lodna and Imogen dice. Both of those are inspired by Critical Role Campaign 3. And then depending on how I'm feeling, we're going to do some like purple cloud sunrise dice. They're not going to have swords in them, but they're going to be very similar to the dice I made for my friend Sarah for her character Vega in our Strixhaven campaign. Those dice got a lot of love, and I want to bring in some like nice like sunset cloud vibes. But those will be the ones we do last, just kind of depending on how I'm feeling, if I want to do 4 different designs today, since that one doesn't require any prep for it. So the first thing we're going to do is to prep for the galaxy pour. I need to cut my cellophane into strips. So I have 3 different colored cellophanes here. These are all from OOAK. These are their Angelina films. So we have this like, these two look very similar, but they are a different base color. But these are all very like blue, purple. That's the kind of vibe with a nice bright yellowy orange flash to them. And these are what I use to make the Astrophel dice, which are super pretty. I'm super excited to be bringing those back. Just making sure I got the 3 that I need. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to layer all 3 of these on top of each other, and then we're just going to cut them into little chunks. So we're just, these scissors are not the best scissors in the world, but that's because I need to get new crafting scissors. But we're just going to kind of cut these into pieces. They don't need to be evenly sized. I mostly just want to get a nice kind of variety of length because we are going to crinkle these up. These scissors really need replaced, but that's okay. So we're just going to cut these into a cup and then set these off to the side to come back to when we're ready to pour these dice. I always find it is best to prep all the materials ahead of time so I don't have to try and like cut stuff up with resin covered hands, because then you get resin on your scissors and then you forget to clean your scissors and you try and use them later and you get dried, sticky, gross stuff all over your hand. It's not great. So we're not going to do that, which is why we prep first. It also just makes for a very much less chaotic pour, especially when you plan on doing multiple sets or multiple dice designs all at once. Like I plan on pouring 6 to 8 sets of dice today in 3 to 4 different designs. So the more prep work you do ahead of time, the less chaotic that has to feel. So we just are going to be prepared. So while we're doing this, so the Astrophel set kind of took off on Instagram more than any other set of dice I've ever posted has. So I wanted to work to bring it back to the shop. It was almost going to be back in the shop last weekend, and then the resin was doing some real funky stuff after I tumbled them, and I just like didn't feel super comfy listing them. So I didn't, because I wanted to make sure that the dice were stable and were safe. So we didn't list those last week. But so now we have like a really nice, fun, collection of shiny little pieces here. We're going to set that to the side. And then we also need to do a little bit of prep for the Lodna dice. So for these dice, I use a piece of this black ribbon. It's got a little bit of floral pattern to it that is interesting in the dice because it does create some variance in the ribbon, but it's not so overwhelming or distracting, especially since we're just cutting up little pieces of it. So just like we did with the cellophane, I'm cutting this. I'm going to put this into a cup, and then we're going to set it aside for now, and we'll use that when we pour those dice. So the Astrophel dice, yeah, those soft cured or became soft cured after I tumbled them, which I've never had happen before. I believe it's just because they got too hot in the tumbler. So I am working to do some things before I tumble my next collection of dice to make sure that they don't get overheated. I'm currently trying to get them to re-solidify, and they just haven't fully done that yet. So I'm going to give them another week, and then they might just be a lost cause, which is why we're repouring them today. And unfortunately, the Lodna dice suffered a similar fate. They also went in the tumbler and then came out kind of soft. So we're going to repour both of those, which is fine. Resin is finicky. I say that all the time. Resin, you could be really good at using resin and do it all the time, and you're still going to get weird stuff sometimes. So try not to beat yourself up too much about it, and then you move on. So yeah, we're just going to cut this lace up. I have been really enjoying using lace in dice recently. I think the textures are really interesting. It's just a fun inclusion, and it's also not an expensive inclusion, which is really nice, and it's not hard to work with either. I say as my scissors don't want to cut today. Note to self, put new craft scissors on the shopping list for next week. These dice are super pretty. I kind of want to keep a set for myself. I didn't last time, and I kind of regretted it. So if these turn out, I might be keeping at least a D20 for myself. We'll see. That's kind of the perks of making your own stuff, is you can just sometimes decide, I don't want to list this today. Cool. So these are going to also be set aside. We just have a bunch of nice little pieces of ribbon here that are much more appropriately sized to put in dice. And these we're going to set off to the side with these nice little red floral bits. And then that's actually all of the prep we need to do pre-pouring. So I'm going to take my rings off. We're going to get our first set of molds, get our resin out, and get started, which I'm super excited about. We're going to be starting with our Imogen dice, which are a super pretty color palette. These are going to be like Imogen 2.0 because I am missing one of the things that I used last time. I don't know what happened to it. So that's okay. But I do need to grab some molds here, and I will walk through what a mold process is. So we have all of our molds here. I am going to get safety geared up, and then we'll jump into our first set of dice. So when you're working with resin, resin is a super toxic material. It's really important that you work with it safely so that you do not damage your skin, your lungs, or your overall health. So I do use safety equipment. I am putting gloves on right now. I'm also in a well-ventilated room that my pets are not allowed into, with a window open so that any of the fumes do not stay in the room but are able to exit safely. All of those things are super, super important when you're working with resin. Even if it says low fumes, they're still there, and you've got to be safe. Safety and health is priority number one. So, now that we're set up, I'm going to get my molds out. make sure we can see what is happening here. So I have a jewelry mold. I think these sunflower inspired dice are going to be really pretty as a jewelry piece. So I do have that. It's like hard to figure out where to quite put the camera. I also have a D2 mold. This is just a coin that has my logo on the base. You can kind of see it indented there. And then I also have a single D20 mold. In the off chance we have some extra resin, we're going to use that. So these are my molds. These are made with my master dice that have my logo, a special font, some unique shapes. So you can see here the mold. This is made out of silicone. I mold the masters and then we pour the resin into this. So you can see in this one, in both of these ones, the D6 here has my logo kind of in the bottom of it, and then I do have some molds that have the 6 is normal and then the D20 is the logo, and that's just kind of like a personal preference for where you want a logo, if you want a logo when you are making dice. Some people are very, very much against logos, and I very much respect that. However, I, as a maker, really like having a way to identify my work, and so in the sets that I make, I will always have something that has a logo. Singles are a little bit different, but in the sets I'm making, something is going to have a logo so that it is easily identifiable back to me, which is nice. We have a lot of stuff for this dice set, so I'm just kind of trying to get organized here so that we can start mixing resin. So I'm currently using Paduo resin. It is a 1-to-1 part A to part B epoxy resin. So it's not a UV resin and it's not a polyurethane resin, because those all just act differently and they serve different purposes. So I'm going to be measuring out some resin, and we're going to start with the boring stuff, which is just mixing. It's not the fun part of making dice, but you do need to do it properly so that your dice cure. Because uncured dice are not safe dice, and we don't want that here at Sunflower Dice. So that is the part A, and then we're going to add some of the part B to that. There are a bunch of different resin brands. I'm currently using this one. I've also really liked the Pro Marine resin. It's a little bit more expensive, and they just, I needed resin a little bit sooner than that was going to get to me, so I did get the Paduo this time. I like them both pretty equally for different things. It kind of just depends on what you're wanting to do. This Paduo resin is a lot thinner than some other resins, so I really like doing work with like flowers and complicated inclusions with these, just because the thinner resin releases bubbles a little bit better. So now we're just going to mix the resin, and we need to mix this for like 2 to 3 minutes, so we're going to be here for a little bit. I'm trying to think of some updates to share while we're mixing this up. I do have next Thursday and Friday off, so normally I stream on Tuesdays and Sundays, and then I'll throw in an occasional dice pouring stream. On Tuesday nights, I am currently doing a Spyro 3 playthrough. We're trying to get 117% of the game. We're about 80% of the way there. And then on Sundays is Sim Sunday, which is my absolute favorite. And we're currently doing a Not So Berry Legacy Challenge, which is basically where you're trying to play 10 generations of The Sims with the same family. And each generation has a specific set of challenges. People keep dying and getting abducted by aliens, and it's been a lot of fun. It's a little bit chaotic, but I'm really enjoying it. So if you're interested in either of those things, you should definitely check out the channel. And then next Thursday and Friday, I have 2 days off school, so I might be doing a bonus stream one of those days, either some Planet Zoo, or I might do another resin stream. We'll kind of see how I'm feeling. I haven't quite decided yet what I want to do with that extra day that I have. Sorry, there's just like a fluff on my mold. I'm trying to get out of the way. But yeah, so for the image and dice, we're going to be working with clear resin for the first 2 sets, and then the second 2 sets will include some more color. Well, I guess it depends on the order. I might do the Galaxy dice before I do the Lodna dice, and those will obviously be a lot of color. Lots of blues, which is my favorite color of dice to make. which is very easy to tell because if you go in my shop, about 50% of the stuff in there is blue. So if you're into blue dice, I'm a great shop to check out. Working on branching out into some other colors. I have plans to do like a whole plethora of galaxy dice. So if you're interested in galaxy dice that aren't blue, definitely stick around. I will be bringing back the yellow ones, that yellow orange Death of a Star design, which is a past design that I've sold. And I have a plan to bring a green one using some very special materials I got on my trip to Iceland. So definitely be tuned for that as well. I give this like 1 more minute of mixing. I know this is not the most exciting part of the stream, but it is necessary. We've got to get the resin nice and mixed here. When you're mixing, you want to kind of get along the edges. Definitely make sure you're getting the bottom. And I use a pressure pot, so I am not super worried about introducing air bubbles when I'm mixing. So I mix a little bit faster and more rapidly than you might if you don't have a pressure pot, because then you want to try and minimize air bubbles. You can see, like, in the cup, there's a bunch of bubbles in here that are being introduced right now. But since I use a pressure pot, that kind of minimizes the bubbles once they're poured. So I'm not super worried about it. And I just kind of leave it be. So that's fine. We're going to leave them as is. Give this a nice good stir for like 20 more seconds. And then we can start with the fun part of our Lodna dice design. Make sure I have enough sunflowers. Yeah, we should be good. So Lodna is one of the 3 dice designs I currently make, inspired by the new Critical Role campaign. Having a ton of fun with the campaign. And Imogen is just a really fun character. I feel like I always like Laura's characters, but I'm really intrigued by the direction she took with Imogen. They feel very different than the other 2 characters she's had in the past. I'm just very interested to learn more about her. Okay, so we're going to set this to the side for now, and we'll come back to it. We're actually going to start placing some of the floral bits that are going to go in this dice set. So Lodna's color scheme and her outfit is a lot of like blues and yellows. I really like sunflowers, obviously, hence the name of my shop. And so for the yellow of her scarf, I actually use dried sunflower petals, and we're going to start by putting one of these in each of the molds, each of the dice in my molds. Words are hard sometimes. So we're just placing one in. I'm not super worried about positioning right now because we're going to be putting other stuff in here with it. I am trying to make sure I don't break the petals, though. That's kind of an important thing that I don't want to do for this design. So we're just going to go through. We're sticking one of these in each die. And then I'm also going to be doing some jewelry with these. So I have a jewelry mold here as well that has some D4s, some D6s, or some D10s. And then a D6, D20 pair, because those are some nice extra singles to have in the shop. When I first started making dice, I was very intimidated by florals because they are very prone to trapping bubbles. They're prone to causing lifted faces in your dice and messing with your molds. So I used to be very scared to work with florals, but it's something that I really wanted to do. And sunflowers are my favorite flower, so anytime I get to use them in dice, I get very excited. And I did just get some sunflowers last week. My husband surprised me with them when he came home from work one day, so those are starting to get near the end of their life, which means I will be pulling them apart to dry them soon. always nice to get some dice making materials from something else that you already have. Because those material expenses, they do add up. But it's fun to like dry your own flowers and be able to use them and be like, yeah, these are flowers that I got from blah blah blah. I have a set that I made last year, my like first real attempt at florals I made with my birthday flowers that I got last year, and they were not great. There were definitely some issues with the dice themselves, but they were still really special. I still have them and I use them all the time. It's a fun way to kind of see where we started with this journey. So now I'm going to take these pink petals. These dry, when they are in resin, they turn really translucent, and you can mostly just see the veining in the petals once they're in the dice, which is a really cool effect. So I'm going to be putting one of each of these in the dice as well. And then we'll use some smaller florals to kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. Because when you're working, you want to have a varying degree of like sizes and shapes of things in your dice, just to make them more visually interesting to look at. So I try and always put some like bigger things in first, and then kind of go in and fill the blanks with some smaller pieces as well. Oh, that one already has it. All right, going into mold number 2. So if you are hanging out in chat and you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I always love talking about my process and sharing some of my thoughts and experiences with other makers. I think one of the really cool things about this community is how open to sharing everyone is. And so if you're hanging out and you have questions, please let me know. Whether you're just curious about the process or you're looking into getting into it yourself, I am happy to chat. Otherwise, it will just be unguided rambling for the next couple hours, which is fine too. All right. So we've got some of this nice pink in here, and we are going to add some purple. So if you're looking at this and you're like, Imogen has purple, I know, we're getting there. Do not fret. I will not forget that iconic purple. And then I ink these in blue to get that blue in. So there will be some blue as well. You just won't necessarily see that today. Oops. And because the flowers move, I'm not as picky about where these end up in the dice. I just want to make sure that they're in there. And then once we put the resin in, everything kind of starts to move around. So the next thing I'm going to be adding is some of these. Hello, focus. No, it's not going to focus. But these are just like little bits of, I believe, lavender. I could be wrong. But I just place a couple of these in each one. Some of the bigger sprigs I'll put in some of the bigger dice, or I'll just get a couple of like individual pieces to let float around. Again, we want variety so that the dice are visually interesting to look at. I always like putting some of the longer pieces in our D4s, just because I have elongated D4s for this earring mold. So I always like to make sure that some longer pieces end up in there. Ooh, I am flinging them around now. I think one of the really fun things that I've been enjoying lately about dice making too is how you can use similar inclusions and get really different effects. So I make a lot of dice with sunflowers in them. I really like sunflowers. I have them a lot, so I have access to them pretty frequently. And it's really fun to play with different ways to like make that same floral inclusion look different and unique. That's something I've been really enjoying lately. So this is one of 3 or 4, it might be 4 now, different sunflower designs that I have made or have available in shop. And they're also different, which I think is really cool. Just gonna put the last little bits of this in some of the dice. And then we'll move on to our next inclusion. Ooh. Oh dear. Yeah, I don't want the stems so much. Alright, and then the next thing we have, this is a little bit different than what I used last time, so I'm not going to put them in both sets, but I have some of these like, they're like spiky little grassy things that are also kind of fluffy. I don't know quite. Maybe I won't use those. I don't know that I'm feeling those. Just get them, set them off to the side. They're not quite as purple as I was hoping they would look. So we might skip those. We'll leave those out. Because dice making is about edits and revisions sometimes, and that is okay. Alright, we have our mold prepped. We have resin. So now what I'm going to do is, it's not a great idea to pour your dice straight from the cup that you mixed your resin in, because sometimes you can get unmixed resin on the sides of your mixing cup, which can lead to weird spots in your dice that just don't cure properly. So we don't want that. So I always use paper cups. I also think it's just easier to like squeeze them and then pour from that. I'm going to put a little bit of the silver mica powder in there just to give it a little bit of a shine to start. We'll add some other things to the second part of our pour. But we're just going to mix this in. And what I'm going to do first is actually get these out of the way. I don't think I'm going to have enough for these singles for this one, and that's okay. So we're going to set that to the side. But what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to pour a little bit of clear resin in, because I want it to be able to easily kind of sink in and fill the space underneath all the flowers. So when I do this, I try and pour nice and high and nice and slow and nice and thin. And I'm only trying to fill about 1/3 of the mold maybe, because I'm going to add some like foil and some other glitters to this. But I just want the base pour to be clear. And that's because if there's a lot of chunky stuff in the resin, it might not get all the way through the mold. And then you end up with weird bottom faces, which we don't want. So right now I'm just going through and adding a little bit of this clear resin into each mold. Alright, now that we've done that, I'm going to put some, ooh, I'm going to knock our camera over. I'm going to put some more of the clear resin in our cup. And I'm actually going to add a little bit more of the silver. I'm also going to add a little bit of this color shifting powder from Chromatic Castle. This is their color spray alchemy dust, which is like a really interesting like blue-green shift. And I'm also going to add a little bit of their amethyst Fairy Fire Interference powder, which is like a purple color shift. So we're going to get a little green color shift, a little purple color shift. And we're not stopping there, because I also want to get a little bit more of that purple in. So I'm going to take a little bit of purple foil. I just kind of break some of this off and scrape it into our cup. I'm going to do the same with a little bit of gold foil, because I want to get in a little bit more of that yellow tone as well. We're just going to scrape that into our resin cup as well. I think I want a little bit bigger of a piece of purple. And I just use a popsicle stick to scrape this because the foil likes to stick to everything, and I don't want to accidentally get purple foil into a different pour because I have purple foil on my glove, which has happened before and is really, really frustrating. So to avoid that, I just kind of use a popsicle stick instead of my hand. And I still have foil on my glove. Because of course I do. Because this foil likes to stick to everything. Which is fine, it's just not quite what we're going for. So now I'm going to mix all this together, scrape the sides really well. And this will be what we use to fill the rest of our molds. So you can see now we've got a nice mix. That foil breaks down into really small pieces. It's different sizes, so we've got some nice variety. And again, we're gonna just start high. We're gonna pour this in to fill the molds. And we'll probably have to go around and do this a couple of times because the molds will trap air in it a little bit. And then that air bubble kind of pops and the mold fills the rest, or the resin fills the rest of the mold really well. So we're just going nice and slow, nice and high. Get a little bit more in there. We'll do the same with our other two molds. Sometimes the foil kind of clumps up at the pour spout a little bit and then you get like a big chunk that falls out, but that's okay. And we'll do our last mold. Seeing a couple of places I might need to go down and poke the flowers a little bit just to get them to lay a little bit nicer inside of their respective dice molds. So we're going to do that. I'm also going to try and get the rest of this resin into my pour cup so that we can go through and top off these molds. So right now I'm just kind of, if I see any really large bubbles trapped, I try and pull those out of the die. We'll also go through and pop some of these. And I'm just looking to see like which molds need filled still so that we can fill them all the way up before putting their lids on. So this last one, I'm gonna put a little bit more of the silver glitter in just because I want to make sure that's really consistent. To top it off, we're gonna put a little of this purple glitter in. Not too much, but just enough to get some visual interest into our mold here. And this is what we'll use to go in and top off any die that needs it. And when you're filling your molds, you want the resin to kind of dome a little bit at the top, but you don't want it to be so much that the lids won't sit on properly. It's a fine balance. And sometimes you just get too much anyway because it comes out too fast, and that's okay. Some of that also just comes in when you go to put your lids on. So I'm just doing one final check. Most of these are looking good as far as amount of resin in them. This D20 could use just a smidge more, so we're going to put just a little bit more on here. And then we will put the lids on these and we will move on to our next pour. So all of the resin that I don't use, I do have dump molds, so I will make jewelry pieces, I will make meeples, I have a tic-tac-toe board that's really fun to fill with different pours. So we do use all of the resin well, don't waste it, because resin is expensive. It's also not the best thing for the environment, so I try and make sure we use all of whatever we pour. Now we just kind of go through and we gently seat the lids on these molds, and we'll set them to the side on our pressure pot caddy and move on to our next pour. We got first one done. So I'm going to just set these off to the side, and then we can get set up for pour number 2. Before we do that, I am going to just put away whatever leftover. We have a little bit of leftover foil that I don't need, so I'm going to put that away and then put these pink florals away just to free up some space. And then we'll move on. I think we're going to do the galaxy dice next, which will be a lot of fun. So I'm going to grab our next set of molds so we can get started. Okay, so for the galaxy dice, we have our 2 molds. I'm going to save these molds for one of our other pours. Here we go. All right, we have molds. We'll grab a couple of single molds as well, because I'll probably have extra resin for them. All right, so again, this mold, this one also has the logo D6. The difference here is this has a shard D4 instead of the crystal D4, so it's a slightly different shaped D4, and I think this one works really well with galaxies because it really captures the sparkle that's in them a little bit nicer. So we're going to use this one, and then we have a couple of D20 molds. My D20 molds are looking a little rough, but we'll just grab a couple of them just in case. So for this set, we are going to be using a bunch of glitters. We're going to use the cellophane pieces that we prepped, and then I have 3 different alcohol inks that we'll be using. So we'll have a little bit of color in this one to change it up from the colorless pour we just did. So, like always, we gotta start with getting some resin. So we're gonna measure it out. We don't need quite as much this time because I'm not making that 3rd mold. So I usually, for the 2 full sets and then some singles, I usually use 80 just because I want to make sure I have a little bit extra. I use those, you know, for like meeples. We have some single molds, so I don't want to like be short resin since we're going to be doing a couple of different colors. So we're going to mix out our resin. We got to stir it for a little bit, and then we'll move on to the color, which is always the fun part. So again, we've got to mix our resin for 3 to 5 minutes. It's really important that you mix your resin properly and fully so that your resin cures. So while we're mixing this, I'm trying to think of any life updates. So I do teach middle school. If you are new here, hanging out, I am a middle school ELA teacher, and this week we are working on creation myths, which has been a lot of fun. And the kids have just really interesting interpretations of some of these stories and the connections that they make. So we were reading one story about like how all of the different gods brought something to make to make the earth. So like one god brought sand and another brought like wind and things like that. And one of the students just went, so it was like a potluck and all the gods contributed. And it was just such an unexpected comparison. I could not stop laughing. It was just like a really fun moment of joy for the kids, which I think is really important. And it was a really good connection. Like, was that a connection I had made? No. But it was a really good way to compare what was happening in the story to like something that they had experience with. So that was fun to see. I really enjoy like watching the kids make those connections. I think it's really important. Okay. Need to readjust the camera just a smidge. Apologies if you get a little motion sick. Hopefully that was slow enough that it's fine. Give this like 30 more seconds. And then we get to play with some color and like 6 different kinds of glitter. So always a good time. I know some people are like popping in and out. I know chat's a little quiet today. If you do have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. I love chatting about this process, or just dice making in general, or D&D in general. So if anything is popping into your mind, please feel free to ask. I'm happy to answer those questions while we get our next set up here. Alright, that is looking pretty mixed. Again, I am not careful when I'm mixing my resin, so you can see a ton of air bubbles in there, which I do not personally worry about because of the way I cure my dice. It is perfectly possible to get very nice dice without a pressure pot. I don't have the patience for that. You just have to be much more careful about some of the things that you do, and I just don't have the patience, so I don't do that. But I know plenty of people that make gorgeous dice who have not spent the money on that equipment, and that is also okay. So we're going to start with another clear base, just because I find that a clear window at the bottom of Galaxy dice allows for really nice visibility of the shift and the sparkle. So I'm just putting some more of that silver mica in here to get a nice little bit of a shimmer. And we're just putting the barest amount, like I want to barely cover the bottom of the die with this clear resin. And the reason for that is because, again, the clear resin creates a window into the dice. It guarantees there's some transparentness at the front here, which we really want. And it allows for the cellophane to really pop against the darker colors we're going to put in the rest of the dice. So I'm just putting the barest little amount in here so that that bottom face is just covered. We're going to fill our single molds here as well. Again, you want to pour like nice and high, nice and slow. Put a little bit on this D2 coin. And now we're going to grab our cellophane that we cut up. So again, this is 3 different colored reflective mylar or cellophane. It depends, different people call it different things. I've heard both. This specifically is Angelina sheets, Angelina fiber film, Angelina film. That I am going to take a couple of different sheets of, and we're just going to crumple it up so that it has some different shapes in it, some different folds, because those like creases are what's going to cause the different colors to pick up. So you can see here, this is like a little bit blue, a little bit purple, a little bit greenish orange, and we're going to take that and we're just going to shove that into the die that we just filled with that clear. And that is going to be what gives the center of our galaxy some life and some color. And then we're just going to repeat it. So again, I'm making sure to get at least 2 different colors of film. We're just balling it up with my fingers. This does get a little messy because the tweezers are going to get resin on them. So you're going to inevitably get resin all over your gloves. That's okay. that's what the gloves are for. So we're just we're crinkling, and then we're putting into the clear resin that we just put in our molds. You want to be kind of careful about how much you're putting into a die. For a larger die like the D6, the D12, the D20, I usually do 3 pieces. For the smaller dice, like the D12, or not the D12, the D10s, in particular, I usually only do 2, just because I don't want them to be putting a ton of pressure on the top of the mold. I also don't want them to like press the sides of the mold out, because if you shove too much in there, you could warp your molds, which we don't want to do. And then if 2 doesn't seem like enough, like if I grab 2 like smaller pieces, you can always go back and add more later, but it's a lot harder to take them out. So it's better to start with too little than to start with too much. So we're just gonna keep crinkling our stuff here, and we're gonna put it in our molds. And once these are set up, I will hold a mold up to the camera so we can see what it looks like with the mold prepped. Galaxy dice have been kind of a big trend for me to make recently. I've been really enjoying making them. I think they're a lot of fun. I have plans right now to do a green one, and then I'm going to be bringing back a yellow and orange one that I've done in the past. If there are like color combinations you would like to see, feel free to let me know so I can make a note of that as I start prepping for my next shop update. So again, we're just grabbing some pieces, crinkling them. That's only 1. And it doesn't matter if like the pieces you get are the same size. What I'm really trying to do is make sure I get like 2 different pieces of Mylar. Since I have 3 different colors in here, I want to try and get at least 2 of those colors per die so that the set feels more cohesive. They don't all need all 3 of them, but as long as they all have 2 different colors, none of the dice are going to feel like an outlier, like they don't belong together. Which is why I like to do 3 colors, because then since I just kind of mix up all the pieces in the cup, it's a lot easier to make sure you get at least 2. But if you only have 2 colors, you have to work a lot harder and be a lot more intentional about the pieces that you grab. Probably should have taken my watch off, but now I am covered in resin and that's not going to happen. So we're just going to have to be careful there. I also know some makers dip their cellophane in the resin before they put it in the dice molds. You can do that. It is obviously going to cause a little bit more of a mess. But I have found if I'm like intentional with the layers of my pour and I start with that clear base like we did, I don't have to dip them in the resin first, as long as I'm like doing those other things, which is nice. D20s I always make sure to get at least 3 pieces for, because they're just a lot bigger, and I found if you don't, then they just feel kind of empty. And then as soon as I get the cellophane into this D2, I'll hold up one of the molds and like show what that finished piece looks like. Well, finished as in the mold is prepped. For the D2, I do crinkle them up still, and then after I've crinkled them, I try and uncrinkle them a little bit, just because the D2 is not very tall, so you want to make sure that there is like space for the lid to go. So I found that kind of partially uncrinkling them is the way to go with the D2s. I have just a couple pieces of cellophane left, so I am just crinkling those up and then deciding like which dice look a little empty to add just like a couple of small pieces that we had left over. Got one last piece here, and then we get to start doing the color and the glitter, which is the best part. Okay, these are looking really good. So this is what the mold looks like right now. You can see how reflective. Wow, that doesn't want to focus. Hello? There we go. You can see it just looks like little reflective little pieces of gems in there, which is really fun. So now we're going to mix up the base color of our galaxy, which is going to be a really light blue. And we want to start with a light color because we want the darkest colors to be at the back. So for this, I'm going to take just like 1, maybe 2 drops of this cerulean. This is the Let's Resin alcohol inks. I'm going to put just like 1 drop in our cup, maybe. Hello. There we go. This one is running out, it seems like. Yeah, because that's not... This is a very pale color, which is perfect. That's actually exactly what we want. So as soon as this mixes, I'll show off what this color looks like. So we can see it's this like nice, very pale blue. We're going to start with a paler color so that we can build the intensity. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to add a bunch of different glitters. We have the amethyst glitter that we used in the not the Lodna, the Imogen dice. So these are color shift glitters. Color shift is a really important part of this galaxy process. I also have this Grindalo color shift flake. These are all from Chromatic Castle. They make amazing glitters and pigments. So all of these are from there. I also have the Paladin Dragon Flakes, which is like a nice green blue shift. We just put a little bit in here. Do I measure these? No. Should I measure them? Maybe, but I don't. And then the last one is the Deepest Depths, which is like a blue glitter. And we're just going to put a little bit of that in here as well. We're going to put more of this blue glitter in the darker color that we're going to add here in a second. So these are all going to get mixed together. And we've got like a super nice kind of tropical blue shimmery situation here. Perfect for what we need. And now we're going to fill this about halfway. So not like between half and 2/3. And again, we're going to pour nice and slow because we want the resin to seep in all of the folds of the cellophane that we just put in there. Which is part of the reason we do this in a couple of steps, is to make sure that we're not getting air bubbles in our inclusions. Because air bubbles are no good. Poke this down a little bit. We'll have to adjust that once that gets full before we put the lid on. So again, we're just pouring nice and high, nice and slow, so that this is about halfway full. I might have put a little too much in that D6, but that's okay. Sometimes it's a little hard to tell, but you just do the best you can. We'll fill up our single molds here. So now I'm going to take what we have left of our resin. I'm going to split this in half. So I'm going to put half of it in the cup we were just using for the blue, and the rest of it I'm going to drain into a second cup, and we're going to use that for the black here in a little bit. So next we're going to take this Ranger alcohol ink in Glacier. We're going to put a little bit more. We want this to be a darker color, so I'm going to put like 3 drops in here. Give this a good mix. And then I'm also going to add 1 drop of the Cobalt Ranger ink, just because I want to deepen this up just a little bit. And we want this to be darker because the darker is colors are going to let the color shift pop more, and it's going to make the sparkles seem a lot more dramatic. So for this one, I'm going to put the amethyst, I'm going to put the deepest depths, and I'm going to put the like flakes in. But I'm going to use more of the blue glitter this time. So we're going to build the intensity of this color shift and sparkle. We're going to give this a good mix. And then I'll show this off here in a second. So this is like a much richer blue color. It's super sparkly. I want it to pop just a little bit more, so I'm going to put one more drop of alcohol ink in here. And that's looking very good. So I'm going to start filling a pipette with this while I work on mixing up our black. So the black is going to be the very top, well, it'll be the bottom of the die, so the D1, like the one face. And I still want it to be like a little sparkly, but this is mostly to just make sure that the contrast is as high as possible. So to keep the continuity, I still put the silver mica in, and then I'm going to use some of this Rainbow Noir Chameleon pigment, which is like a black-blue color shift glitter kind of situation. We're going to put a little of that in here too. And that'll just enhance the black a little bit so that the colors really pop. Give this a good mix. And then we're going to fill a pipette with this as well. And the pipettes we're using just because it offers a little bit more control than just tilting the cup. So for this nice blue color we have here, I'm going to insert that into my die mold and kind of just move it up and down, swirl it a little bit, so that it's not all in one place, but that it's mixing with that other color we have in there. I still think this could be darker. And this is why we tweak our formula a little bit. If we're not super happy with it, we can just add to it, because alcohol inks are translucent, so you're able to build the color, which is nice. So we have this nice blue. We're just pipetting this in kind of around the die, around the cellophane, so that the dies are about 3/4 of the way full. You want them mostly full at this point. And while that's taking, we're going to take the black, and the dice that we just filled, we're going to put the black just on the top. And that black at the back of the die is really going to make these other blues pop, and it'll enhance that reflection of the mylar so that it looks a lot more visually appealing, which is always the goal. That's what like really makes the color shifts stand out. We didn't put blue in that one yet. Whoops. Sometimes you just forget what die you're working on. You can also use syringes for these. I know makers that will prefer the syringes to the pipettes. I don't have a preference. I just have pipettes right now. I don't have syringes right now. I have used both. The syringes I feel like are nice because you are much less likely to like introduce a bunch of air into your dice, which is always good. The less air we put in, the better at this point. But I don't know. I have pipettes right now, so that's what I'm using, just because I don't want to waste what I have. It is a user's preference, which is one of the cool things about dice making, is you can use similar techniques with different materials and kind of get your own results. And you often can't get the same results twice because resin is finicky. It's fickle. It doesn't always do what you want it to. I just popped a big bubble in there. I should move this out of the way. Then you could actually see. So I'm just kind of taking the pipettes right now and kind of swirling the darker blue around the dye so that it's not all in one place. I don't want it to seem like distinct layers of color. I want it to seem a little more natural than that. So that's why we're moving the pipette around and we're not just pouring another layer of resin into the dye. We want to make sure we're leaving room for the black, because the black is that like final piece there. Just kind of poke that in. We'll fill up our singles, and that is our second set of dice today. So the next set we're going to be making is our other Critical Role set. So if you are here for some Critical Role dice, we are about to make our Lodna dice, which I recently posted on Twitter. If you haven't watched Critical Role Campaign 3, Lodna backstory lore was just dropped, and it was really intense. And I think we're all really excited to see like what comes of that. So I was like, I have to bring this design back. It sold out the last time I did it, so I wanted to bring it back. We're gonna revamp it just a little bit from the original design, but not by much. I think it's just going to kind of enhance what we've already done. Okay, so this blue pipette we are done with. I'm going to top off our single molds here. And then these look really exciting. I'm very excited about them. And then this blue I think is going to make some really pretty meeples. So I have a meeple mold as one of my like resin dump molds. So I'm going to fill these like 2/3 of the way through with the blue. And then we'll pipette some black into them. I think those will be really cool. Guess we'll find out. It's always the fun part about making dice is you never quite know what you're going to get at the end. So just kind of checking these to see if any of them need a little more. We're looking good. I do need to poke a couple of the cellophanes into a better place because they are light, so they do float sometimes, and I don't want them floating when I put the lids on. So we're just kind of tapping it around, trying to keep the resin in the mold as well still. And then we're going to put the lids on these friends. When you put the lids on your molds, you want to kind of roll them on gently. You want to push down enough to make sure that the lids are on securely, but you don't want to like squeeze all the resin out of them. And then I'm just taking my full molds and I'm setting them over on the caddy that I use to put them all in my pressure pot. And then we'll do that at the end. So they're just kind of getting set to the side for now so that they're out of the way. And so that they're like all in one place. Finish filling up our meeple mold. I think I'm going to just use the meeple mold for freebies, but if you would be interested in purchasing resin meeples for your games, let me know. if that's something that you think would be like a cool thing. I don't really use meeples ever, so I don't really know what people do with them. I know they're for board games, obviously, but I don't really know what people do with them. I'm just going to scoop the rest of this black resin over into my tic-tac-toe board over here, so that we have a clearer workspace to get ready for our dear friend Lodna. Okay. All right. So we've got 2 molds here, and then I do plan on doing a jewelry mold for this one as well. So that is what that 3rd mold is for. I'm going to be putting most of these glitters away because I won't be using them for our other 2 designs. And then our blue alcohol inks can also get put away. It's helpful to just kind of clean up as you go a little bit so that you have room to do the things you need to do. All right, so we're about to start dice set number 3, which is the Lodna inspired dice. And just like all of our other ones, we're going to start with our resin. Making pretty good progress. We've done our prep and our first 2 sets in the first hour, so we're definitely going to do this set. I might do a 4th set, I might not. My throat is getting kind of scratchy, and it is hard to drink water while you are pouring dice, so we'll see about the 4th set, but we're definitely doing at least these 3. So again, we're going to measure out equal parts, part A and part B, because the resin I am using is a 1-to-1 by volume ratio. If you're working with resin, it's really important to know if your resin is volume or weight, because the part A and part B doesn't always weigh the same. So this is a part A, part B by volume, so I want equal parts, which is my preferred volume measurement. I know some resins are like 2-to-1, and I like always would forget which is which, and then I would have goopy dice that didn't cure. So when possible, I try and work with 1-to-1 by volume resins. So we're just mixing away here. This is the not super exciting part of dice making. You know, it's not super glamorous. I also need to do some like inking and sanding at some point. If you're interested in like an inking, sanding, chatty stream kind of like this, but instead of pouring dice, it's like finishing dice, please let me know. I haven't done any of those on the stream because I don't know how interesting those would be, since sanding and polishing and inking is all kind of repetitive. But if that's something you're interested in seeing, please let me know. And then I'd be happy to do some of those here on the channel as well. I'm gonna give this like 1 more minute. I want to make sure it's really nice and mixed here. Think anything else that's going on. There's not really any other big updates right now. I am really trying to hit 50 followers by my birthday in mid-April, so if you're interested in giving the channel a follow, if you like video game streams, like if you like dice pouring streams, if you like chatty streams, definitely give the channel a follow or bring a friend. I would really love to hit 50 followers. I think that'd be really cool. Not as worried about like my average viewership per video, I guess, right now, but it'd just be cool to like hit the 50 follower mark, which is like the first follower goal Twitch kind of gives people. So that would be really cool if you're interested in that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to actually change gloves because these ones are really messy and I don't want to get a ton of resin all over the handles of my tweezers. So whenever I pour dice, I always have a second pair of gloves pulled out of the box already. Just because often you do switch gloves out, or maybe you tear a glove or something like that. I just like having them out and accessible if I need them, so that it's not like a big issue if something were to happen. Because protecting your skin is super, super important. For those of you that don't know, if you work with resin without gloves and you get uncured resin on your skin often, or you get resin dust on your skin often, it can cause allergic reactions and it can get like absorbed into your bloodstream. It's just like really bad. You shouldn't do it. So I always wear gloves. I just ripped this glove. Cool. It's gonna be fine though. It's just the wrist. Okay. So for the Lodna dice, we're gonna actually start with the ribbon that we cut up earlier. So we cut these like pieces of ribbon. We're actually gonna start by placing those in our molds. And how we place them is probably going to be how they stay. So as I'm putting them in the mold, I try and kind of spread them out so that instead of curling in, they are kind of flat against the faces of the die. Like, I don't want a big lace clump in the middle. I want the lace to be as spread out as possible. So you do that when you put the lace into the mold. I try and put the more dense pieces in the bigger dice just because you can see them a little bit better. That doesn't always happen, but when it can happen, it is nice because you can kind of see the textures and the patterns a little bit better. The D20s are always a difficult one to place because the opening is really small and the inside is not. But that's okay. So I am just taking pieces one at a time. We're just kind of pressing those up along the edges, and I'll show the mold up close once this is done. We're basically kind of creating an outer shell of lace that the resin will hold into place, and it looks really pretty when it's all finished. I've been really into using lace for dice lately. It started with my Bridgerton dice. I made a set of dice that had lace and pearls in it, inspired by Bridgerton, the musical, the unofficial musical, because I was late to that trend, but I fell in love with it anyway. And so I made some dice inspired by that had lace and pearls in it, and they were absolutely beautiful. I still have a couple of those in shop if those sound like your jam. I definitely recommend you checking those out because I love them. I think they're really beautiful. And then I made some Taylor Swift dice that had lace in them. I just think it's a really interesting media to use. This one's too big. We'll give it a snip real quick, which is probably a good thing because I think we're going to be like one short otherwise. The shard D4s just don't have a lot of surface space to them, so you want to use a smaller piece. And yeah, we just didn't quite cut enough, so I'm going to cut this one in half too, and that's just going to be fine. Okay, so now we have these molds that have lace kind of pressed up against some of the edges. You'll be able to see the patterns really nicely. along the surface of the die. And what we're going to do now is to add a little bit of that signature pop of red. We're going to take these red floral pieces and just kind of place them inside the dice in, you know, directions and ways that make sense for the different shapes. Try and use bigger clumps in the bigger dice and smaller clumps in the smaller dice so that none of the dice feel too empty. I'll use like longer ones in the D4s because those dice are just longer. We'll just kind of go around and fill in these. Curious if you have been watching Critical Role, what were your reactions to the Lodna backstory reveal? Because I was shook. I was so, like, I kind of had guessed that early on. I'm trying to be vague because I don't want to give spoilers if you haven't seen it yet. If you haven't seen it yet, you should fix that as soon as possible. I had made a guess similar to what her backstory was very early on, but hearing it actually play out and watching the cast's reaction to it was just, it was something else. Like, in a good way, it was something else. Okay. So we have this, and I think to play into her backstory a little bit, I kind of want to add a little something extra this time to one of the sets. I'm not finding what I want, so maybe we won't. We'll just stick with this. That's okay. Okay, so again, we're gonna prep to pour with our words have escaped me momentarily in our cup. We're gonna get a little bit of this. I am gonna put some of this color shifting powder in it too, just because I think it does add a little extra pizzazz to the dice. And so for this one, we are gonna be doing some smoke swirls in it. So I am only gonna fill these about halfway again. We'll fill them all the way up in a moment, but for now we're just gonna fill these about, oh well, I'm gonna fill the D4 all the way apparently. It's always the D4s that I'm like, and I filled that too much. So the reason we're filling this part way is because I want to put some smoke swirls in here, and to do that we need resin to swirl some ink into. And then we pour more ink on top to cause those swirls to kind of disperse a little bit and not be so thick. So we're going to fill this halfway, do our ink swirls, and then fill it the rest of the way. Can't quite tell if that's halfway for the D20, but that's going to be close enough. Alright, so each of these dice is about halfway filled. I'm going to put some more in here just so it's ready to go. So now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to make a little bit of a pool of resin on my work surface. This is why I use these HelloFresh recipe cards, because they're not very absorbent. Which is helpful for what we're about to do. So I'm going to put some resin straight, or some ink straight onto this resin that I just dropped here. And we're going to grab a toothpick to mix this together, sort of. So we have this like ink covered toothpick, and we're gonna just stick this straight in to the dice and give it a little bit of a swirl to get some really thick ropes of ink into each of the die. Unfortunately, because this is like black ink and a black lace filled die, it's going to be kind of hard to see. But what this is going to do is it's going to have these thick ink tendrils in it that when you pour the resin on top of it, the resin will disperse the ink into thinner ribbons and kind of create this like smoky tendril effect that ends up looking really cool. Like most of the time anyway. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but hopefully it works out this time. So we're just kind of putting some thick blocks of ink in here. You can also just drip ink straight on a toothpick, but I found I use a lot less ink doing it this way than dropping it straight on a toothpick. So I tend to prefer doing it this way just to kind of save some resources. But both ways are valid ways to do this. So we're gonna get a little more glitter, mix it up, and now we can fill these up pretty diced up. All right, I'm gonna start here in the middle. Again, I like to pour as high as I can and as thin a stream as I can when I'm working with inclusions like this, like the lace, because I want to make sure that the resin gets as much of the dye as possible. I don't want like a trapped corner that doesn't have any resin in it, because then you don't have a functional dye, which is a bummer. And it's really hard to tell if the ink is dispersing properly right now because the lace is also black. So we just kind of have to cross our fingers and hope for the best. Which is both really exciting in resin work and also really terrifying, but that's what makes demolding day so exciting. You never quite know what you're gonna get, which can be really fun. All right, we've got our last few dice over here. Looks like I am just gonna not have enough resin in the cup. Luckily, we have some more mixed here. Gotta really scrape the edges to get this out of here. That's okay. Just a smidge more glitter because we don't want this to feel vastly different from the rest of the dice. And now that we've topped them all off, we just kind of go back and see if any of them popped an air bubble that really underfilled the dice. There's a couple of really big air bubbles coming to the top right now, so that's a good sign that air is moving in the right direction. All right, well, let's go ahead and put the caps on these friends. And then I think we will make that last set of dice, so we're gonna do something that's kind of combining some of the techniques we've already done into one set of dice. Specifically the cloud technique and this ink swirl technique that we just did. So I'm gonna grab those last two molds and we'll get set up. molds. We have done a lot of work today, which is always fun. Even if it is a lot, it means we have a lot of exciting things to demold tomorrow, which is always fun. Gonna scoop the last little bit of this clear resin from this last pour out into my dump mold just so that it's out of the way. And then we'll get started. All right, last round of mixing for the stream. Y'all know the drill. We're gonna get our resin going here. Got our part A, our part B. And if you're interested in seeing how any of these turn out, I normally do demolding sneak peeks, raw dice previews, reels, all of that on my Instagram page, which is at instagram.com/sunflower.dice. So you can check out, give that page a follow to see what these dice end up looking like if you are curious. And then I usually have like giveaways. I post updates about shop restocks, what's coming next, all of that stuff over my Instagram page. So that's a really good place to stay connected if you're interested in handmade dice. I definitely encourage you to give that a follow, not just because it's my page, but also because it's just a really good place to stay informed if you're interested in this kind of stuff. We're going to give this a mix, again, 2 to 3 minutes is like the minimum mixing time for these resins. Making sure you're scraping the edges occasionally, scraping the bottoms, so you don't want those weird pockets. So for these dice, we're going to be doing something similar to our last ones. I just got some black ink on this mixing cup, which we do not want. So we're going to pause for a second here. Black is not the vibe for this set of dice. So this set of dice is kind of a remake of some dice I've made, but kind of not. So I'm currently in a Strixhaven actual play that's being streamed over on my friend Margot's channel. And I was really inspired by all of the characters that everyone came up with and their stories. And so I made dice for everybody. And one of the characters, Vega, does a lot of magic that is colored to look like sunrises and sunsets. I was very inspired by the descriptions of that magic. And so when I made her dice, I pulled in some like purple swirls and some clouds, and then I inked it in a like pastel yellow orange ombre effect to give like some sunrise vibes. And they were super beautiful, and we're going to try and remake them without the swords that were in them because I don't have more tiny swords. But I can make clouds. So we're going to try to do that today. And we're going to see what happens. Hopefully they turn out like they did last time. So again, we're going to start with our clear resin. As one does. I really like starting with a clear base because I think you just have a lot of control over the things that happen after that. Some color shift glitter because I put that in everything nowadays. I have a type, and the type is sparkle. Give this a good mix. And then we're going to fill these about, oh, that's too much full. I want them to be about 2/3 full. So I'm going to pull some out of that D8 because that's too much. But that's okay. We can fix it. It's really hard to tell with the D20s too if you're like at 2/3 or not, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. So this is going to combine the smoke technique that we just did with the pipette cloud kind of thing that we were doing with the galaxies. So we're going to put some purple smoke swirls in here And then we're going to put some white clouds in as well. And that will hopefully look really cool, like it did the last time I did this. Okay, so there were a couple of these that I filled too much, so I'm going to start draining this, and we're going to use the pipette to kind of siphon a little bit out of here, because I need there to be space to put in the clouds. This D20 also had just a little bit too much in it. Okay. So we're going to do that. I'm going to put a little bit more resin on my workspace here. And we're going to set this out of the way for now. We're going to get our purple and our white, because I want these to be like a nice pastel purple. So I'm going to put a drop of white ink on here, and then we're going to put some purple on and mix it and see what it looks like. Let me grab a toothpick. Maybe. There we go. We're just going to kind of mix this together. It's okay if it's a little dark now, because this is going to mix with the white in the clouds when we do that. This might need a little more ink though. It's a little too pale. So I'm going to do some more purple. We'll put a little more white on there, because I want the purple to be really vibrant. Now it's looking almost blue, and I don't know how I feel about that. We don't want blue. Okay, there it goes. Now we're back to purple. Maybe. Okay, well, we're going to take this, swirl it in. I might have to get a different purple, because this is not quite as purple as I'm wanting. So we might need to keep mixing the color a little bit here, which is okay. We can make that work. Yeah, this purple is like super light. So we're gonna grab the Pinata purple. We're gonna put a little bit of that on here too. That might be too dark, but I guess we're gonna see what happens. And then this should show up a little bit better on camera than the last one, so as soon as I'm done, I will pick up one of the molds to show what this kind of looks like before we add more resin into it. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to put another drop of white on here, and then we're going to do one more round of smoke swirls. Oh, this is a pretty color. So the goal is for this to look kind of like the magic-y tendrils, and then we're gonna have some clouds in here, and it's gonna be great. That's the goal. Sometimes you have a goal and then you get a giant mess. We don't want that. But so this is what that looks like currently. You can kind of see the tendrils are floating in the resin. They haven't really moved much yet, but that'll change once we put the clouds in. So for the clouds, I'm gonna put like 5 or so drops of alcohol ink into what's left of our resin. We're gonna mix that in. We don't want to put too much alcohol ink in because then it gets really heavy and it'll all just sink to the bottom, which is not what we want. But we might get that anyway because sometimes that just is kind of what happens. We're going to mix this together so we have a really nice white here. I'm going to get all the clear resin out of the pipette. We're going to pipette up this clear or this white resin. And this is what we're going to use to make our clouds with. So here, I'm just going to kind of bloops kind of up and down into the dye. I'm kind of trying to create some like swirls, some puffiness. We'll see how they turn out. I am not an expert at clouds. I know some people that do amazing clouds. I'm still working on it. I can get them to work about 30 to 50% of the time, depending on what I'm trying to do. But basically, I just want these to kind of float in with the purple. We'll see what happens. I think for these, a lot of the design is going to come through in the inking, which is okay. So I'm just kind of inserting the pipette in random spots, squeezing a little bit of this resin out. I want to use it to create some movement with those smoke swirls we made. I think they're looking cool. I think they have potential. We won't know until tomorrow, unfortunately. Normally I do these pours in the morning so I can demold them before I go to bed, but I had a dentist appointment this morning, so that didn't happen, and that's okay. But now I'm like really curious to see what these are going to look like, and it's going to suck to have to wait until tomorrow. But I guess that'll be a fun way to start the day, is like, how did my dice turn out? We've got just a couple more. This is going to be the last part of the pour, because after this we just put everything in the pressure pot, which involves running an air compressor, which is really loud and probably not fun to hear on stream because you won't be able to see anything. So I am going to start wrapping up. If you've been hanging out, I really appreciate it. I know we didn't have a very active chat today, but I saw people kind of popping in and out, and I appreciate everyone, even if we're all just lurking. I'm just working to create both an informative and a chill stream, so if you're interested in learning about making dice, you have some like techniques to try out yourself, or you just kind of get some insight into why handmade dice are so expensive, because this is one pour. This took 2 hours. And yeah, we made 8 sets of dice, but like, we don't know if those are going to turn out. They might not cure properly. And we used about $15 worth of resin almost. So, this is just one part of the process. And I think if we can be really open with what this process entails, a lot more people will understand like why makers charge what they do to get handmade dice. So that's always kind of part of the journey. Like I said earlier, I will be posting what these look like tomorrow when I demold them. So if you're interested in seeing what these dice end up looking like, definitely give my Instagram a follow. I will put it in the chat in just a moment as soon as I get these molds over on the caddy. Okay, here we go. Alright, so we're going to start closing out with some general announcements. So first of all, thank you so much. If you want to see what these dice turn out to look like, you should definitely give my Instagram a follow. That link just popped up in the chat, as well as my shop link where you can see other examples of my work and dice I've made in the past. I really appreciate everyone that was hanging out. Even if we're just lurking, it means a lot because I like hanging out and sharing what I do with other people. If you're looking for some like other chill, chatty streams, I am currently playing On Tuesday nights, we're doing a Spyro 3 playthrough, and then on Sundays, we have a Sims 4 Legacy Challenge that we're doing. They're both really fun and a really good time. It's a more just like casual, chatty, hanging out, so definitely recommend giving a follow so you can get notified when I go live for those. And if you want to know when else I might be going live for random streams like this, you should definitely check out my Twitter page. I just decided today we were going to do a stream. I posted on Twitter, and then I hopped on here. Since the only way you can get notified on Twitch when someone is live is by following. Following on Twitter is a really good way to get other notifications about what's going on, as well as just like staying up to date with life shenanigans and dice updates and things like that. So those are the other places you can connect with me on the internet. Thank you all so much for hanging out today. I hope to see you over on Instagram land, or maybe see you tomorrow for a Sims 4 stream. I hope you all have a great rest of your Saturday and have a great weekend. Bye, y'all.